So I got invested in lists from an early age. I would go on the website GameFAQs, as well as Wikipedia and YouTube, specifically in search of people's collection videos, so that I could gather as much information as possible on each of the games on each of the consoles for each of the console generations. You know, as you can see, I like stuff from all sorts of generations. I got my fucking Super Nintendo over here and GameCube as well. And then over here I got just a major assortment of goodies. Kind of want to talk about this one pretty soon. Unicorn Overlord. That's going to be fun. But, you know, the point is, check this out, by the way. Had this since I was a kid. Well, the point is, I made these lists obsessively. I wanted to make lists of every single genre, of every game, of every weird, like, item or characteristic that I noticed in games. Like, for example, in the 6th generation, I kept finding all of these games that began with water levels or had water levels be a distinct feature, like there were multiple of them. And I thought this was interesting, so I would make a list of all of the games with water levels that I found. And I didn't know about top 10 videos. I don't even think top 10 videos were really much of a thing when I was doing this. Like, I was 7 years old. I was 7, 8 years old, going on my parents' laptop in the rural South, so I was on dial-up internet, and using dial-up, I'd sit there for ages waiting for my fucking page to load, or for a couple seconds of a video in like 144p to load so that I could find this information. And I was gathering all of this information to use in my lists. But I recently tried to make a new list. I wanted to make a backlog account so that I could have like a comprehensive list of all my different games and all the games I've played, because I don't necessarily have all the games I've played. Some of them I've emulated, some of them I used to have but sold, and so, you know, this is not comprehensive right here. You know, all of the stuff you see before you, this is not a comprehensive representation of what my collection is. Hey, shouts out to this guy. Like, on here, there are tons of emulators. Like, I've played shit tons of TurboGrafx games, shit tons of Genesis games on here, Master System. I have a bunch of NES games, like over here, but there's also a bunch that I have played but don't necessarily own. And so I thought it would be kind of a logistical nightmare to actually document everything I've played, because I don't think I'll necessarily remember all of it in that moment. And the other thing, too, is that I felt like it would be kind of a nightmare to rate all these different games that I've played, because I don't really like rating systems on its own. Like, I think rating systems are unable to encompass all of the most important feelings that we have about art when we make a determination of its quality. I also feel like a lot of art can be viewed in a relatively isolated way. Like, I might give one game an 8 and then another game an 8 for entirely different reasons that, you know, are subject to context, right? And it gets into this really complicated thing where it's like stressful and upsetting trying to rate things. So I don't want to do that. But the other thing about it too is I feel like once I've posted about it online, like in a list form, I've almost kind of made it not mine anymore. Like now this is information for everybody. It's not just information for me. Like all of this stuff is stuff that I've enjoyed primarily by myself without having to share it with anybody, without really telling anybody about it. Whereas like with something like anime, I feel like I always tell someone about the shows that I'm watching because I'm talking to other anime fans who are also watching shows that season, or they're going back through old stuff and they're telling me about it. And so that's like the basis of our friendship, is that we'll talk about anime to each other. And when I'm watching a show, I pretty much always log the next episode that I've watched onto my anime list. And the reason I do that is because I got into anime in a big way around the time that I made my anime list account. And so it was easy for me to add most of the shows that I had already watched, not all of them, but most of them, just as I had started my account. And I would only miss like a couple shows here and there that I was watching. I just wouldn't remember to log them. But I pretty much always logged everything I watched. There was a period of time when I didn't have access to my account and I wasn't logging shit because of that. But in general, I've always logged everything on my anime list. And like, when I'm watching shows with my wife, after an episode will be done, usually I'll just get up and say, okay, I gotta add the next episode to my list. It's like that's how obsessive I'll be about it sometimes. Thankfully, not always. I can binge a couple in a row before having to update the damn thing, but I think that's just a habit that I developed from consuming anime in this specific way, in this community-oriented kind of way. I used to have friends, sadly that I don't know anymore, but I used to have friends that would like check my mal all the time and I'd be checking their mal all the time, because like each of us would watch an entire series, 12 episode series in a day. And like back then I was crazy with it. I was watching like a 12 episode show, a movie, a short, like an OVA series. I could have watched all those in one day, which is crazy to think about now because I don't watch anywhere near as much anime now, but that was how I was doing it. And like, one of my friends would be checking my list and they'd be like, holy shit, bro, like you watched so much shit today or this week. That's crazy. What was this show like? I seen that one before. That one was pretty good. And it would be like a discussion. That was like kind of the basis of our friendship, was that we were all doing that. And I almost don't want gaming friends, like friends who are into retro video games and also the new stuff. It's like I'm into a little bit of everything, right? I almost don't want friends who are into that stuff, just because I kind of like having it as just my own little thing. Like my wife is into that stuff. She likes a lot of the same stuff I do, which is cool, so she and I can share it. But like I almost don't want to share it with anyone else. Like I don't want to fucking be hanging out with people who are all into this stuff. It's not really because I don't want to, but I also don't actively want to, I guess is how I would put it. And then when I think about this whole list thing, I'm like, I don't want to have a publicly facing list in the way that I have for anime. Like I don't want to be that public about my hobby. I'd rather, make videos about certain games that interest me, maybe show off some of my collections at some point. But I don't want to treat video games in the way that I've treated anime, where it's like this really community-oriented, social kind of thing, where like, we're all checking each other's shit out and talking about it. It almost feels like I'd be corrupting something that I've had since I was very young. Because I started playing when I was 2 years old, and I got into collecting when I was 7 years old. Because depending on how you look at it, you could say that I was into collecting at that early of an age because I had a Game Boy and I had a Dreamcast, and that was my stuff. But it wasn't until I was 7, when I was very good at reading online and finding information for my age, I'd say, where, then I could actually start, saving money that I made from doing odd jobs around the house, sometimes supervising. I guess I was getting trained for some of the types of work that I would do later in a way, but I'd get a little allowance, and I'd also just find change and shit that I had learned how to save, and I'd get some money for birthdays and Christmas. So I had this money that I was actively saving towards certain things. I learned that really early. And around that age, when I was reading about the stuff online, and I was saving this money to get my own things, I started to get Nintendo 64, NES, Sega Genesis, original PlayStation, all this stuff. And back then, it was pretty cheap as well, because the video game collecting thing hadn't blown up as this huge trend as it is now, where you have a lot of people in my age range who didn't necessarily like formally grow up with like the NES and stuff. Technically, I grew up with it because I had it at a really early age, but like I wasn't alive when it was a relevant console. Same thing with the Super Nintendo. I wasn't alive for that. But I still fucking, technically grew up with Genesis, right? I was collecting it. But you have a lot of people who are kind of in my camp who started collecting when they were like 17 or 19, but they're in the same generation as me. They just haven't been doing it as long. And those guys drive up prices. The nostalgia people drive up prices, and the multi-millionaire scalpers, people call them investors, I call them scalpers, drive up prices as well. And so it's a really expensive hobby now. And I'm lucky enough to say that, like, I think just about most of the stuff that I have, I actually got before the collecting thing really blew up and it became impossible to get stuff. I mean, there's some stuff here, that I got relatively recently, I guess, like the Japanese 360 games. I mean, this stuff is pretty new, as in I just got it this year. But, a lot of the stuff in this room is just stuff that I've had, like, for ages. And I wouldn't be able to get a lot of this stuff nowadays simply because it's so expensive compared to when I started. And even just a couple years ago, when I was picking some of this stuff up. But I actually don't know where I was going with that. I don't know why I brought up the fact that collecting is such a trend now. It was something to do with lists. Oh yeah, lists. So for whatever reason, I became deeply obsessed with video games from this early age. And I liked compiling lists of them. I wasn't sure why, I just did it. I got this kind of euphoric, satisfied feeling from compiling all these lists. And I think when I was about 10 or 11 or so, I discovered the website pricecharting.com, which is a website where it basically gives you the average price as well as a list of all the recent sales and historic sales of a specific game from a specific region. From eBay, Amazon, all of it is aggregated. And it's a really useful resource for knowing how much stuff is worth. But that in and of itself was interesting to me. I loved knowing how much my stuff was worth, how much it was going up in value, how much things that I wanted in the future were worth, or things that I thought I would probably never have or didn't even have interest in getting. I wanted to know how much that stuff was worth. I liked seeing the list. I liked seeing the numbers. It was really intriguing for me. And so I can see how lists and like raw information has been important for my hobby, but this specific kind of list of having like, my username on a website and having that correspond to every game I've ever played and all the ratings and everything for it, I just don't like that. I really, really don't like that. Because again, it's the social aspect to it that I don't want to bring other people into, my experience playing some of this stuff. I'd rather just have it for myself, like just me alone in my room sitting in front of the TV and really taking it all in and just being able to enjoy that for what it is. And I almost feel like making it so public, I would corrupt a thing that I really love and have loved for so long now. I guess that's how I would explain it. Which is really weird, right? Like, I still feel like I'm not entirely explaining this. Like, I'm not fully explaining, what it is that I feel on this subject. I'm just trying to give the closest approximation to it as I can. Yeah. But I don't know. It's like I find myself telling friends of mine who aren't necessarily that into video games, or at least not the same kinds of games as I am. Maybe they're not into it in a deep way, etc. I try to tell them about stuff I'm into, and like they'll be receptive to it, to me talking about it, but they'll just never have that much to add. Because it's like I'm giving all this trivia and all this deep level knowledge about this stuff that like they don't really have the context for. So it'll just come off like it's like autistic rambling. And while I think it would be nice to know somebody or to know some additional people who are, into this stuff on that level, it feels like I don't really need to. It's not like something I'm actively seeking out. Like, I don't need to feel validated in the stuff that I like, because everyone I've ever met has thought that it's cool that I'm into this stuff. People that I've told about it at work, people from school. When I first moved in here, there were some kids that saw all the shit that I had, that I was carrying, and they thought it was so cool, that I, as a grown man, collect video games. And like, my parents, seem to think that it's pretty cool. They've been pretty supportive of me over this stuff. And so it's one of those things where like why would I need, to be in a community of like-minded geeks when like I can just enjoy it by myself and I feel like I'm getting everything out of it that I can? I mean, if I want to play online multiplayer, that's always an option. If I want to play local multiplayer, you know, um, whenever my wife is around, we're always able to do that. Um, and so I guess with anime, it's much more intuitive to me to like want to discuss the content of shows and make it this international social thing. That's how I got into it, you know. I got into it through discussions on HNA, through YouTube videos about the subject, um, reviews that I was reading on forums and WordPress and things of that nature. And so that is a much more intuitively social thing. And whereas like this stuff, it's like I post about it if I post. Usually I just lurk, but I post about it on the 4chan board VR. And obviously 4chan is an anonymous messaging board. I guess in some sense, technically it's social, but it doesn't really feel like that. Because everybody's anonymous and we're all just kind of communicating information or sniping at each other, it doesn't really feel social in the same way as like Reddit would or something like that. And I do lurk on certain gaming focused subreddits. The main one that I check, the main two that I check is like r/PS2 and r/CRT gaming. Generally because with the latter I like the photos that come out of that subreddit, but VR, you know, I feel like I disagree with probably 90% of the people on that board, but more than half the posts are probably bait. Like it's people trying to piss other nerds off. Um, but there's also a lot of love and passion that gets shown on that board. And so sometimes I post, but usually I just lurk. But that's like, I would say like more than 90% of the socialization I get with gaming is just going on that board and reading what people have to say, which is like a very isolated kind of thing to do, right? It's very insular. But I like engaging with my hobby in that way. And I don't necessarily know if I can fully articulate why, but for whatever reason, maybe it's just a force of habit, like it's because I've been doing it this way for so long. But for whatever reason, I just kind of like sitting in my room and reading what other people have to say and listening to what other people have to say in like YouTube videos. But then just enjoying all this stuff, you know, on my own without even necessarily saying anything about it to anybody, you know, without posting about it, whatever. Whereas, you know, with anime, it's like I'm very prone to posting about it. You know, that being said, you know, on Twitter/X, you know, I do seem to give random opinions on various games and franchises, but it's never like, oh, I'm playing this right now and it's so amazing and here's all my thoughts live or whatever. It's usually like in retrospect, that was really good. I remember that thing. And I feel like I'm much more likely, even on there, to repost stuff that other people post about the subject rather than give my own opinion. And it's like, I feel like it's like a very different approach to this hobby than how I approach like any of my other hobbies, because actually that's not true. I definitely have other hobbies which I primarily keep to myself, for no reason other than it's just like what I do. Um, it's like, so that point may not have been going in the direction I thought it would have been, but it's like, you know, generally speaking, with my hobbies, I'm pretty vocal about them and try to like bring other people into it and share it. But it's like it feels kind of cool, but also kind of like nothing when I get the positive affirmation and feedback that I do on the stuff that I like. Or if I were to hear strangers like in YouTube comments or, you know, in reference to someone else who's comparable to me when they say negative things, it's like, it doesn't even faze me. I don't even think about it, right? Um, it's like I just enjoy this stuff in my very own, like, keep it to myself kind of way, in this very private kind of way. And I think I'd like to maybe write blog posts about some individual games or just about some trivia or facts that I find interesting. Bring some of this stuff into the videos, but again, not in this very active kind of online, I'm gonna microblog every second of this shit kind of way, you know. Um, I guess I just don't. I don't feel the need to do that. I think having a blog is very different than having a YouTube channel as well, though, because with a blog, only a couple people are going to read it, if that. And so I could imagine, having a weekly post that's just like what I played this week, and then writing a brief summary of each of those games with some screenshots on the blog post, and then that's the post, you know, without necessarily like posting a video of that nature, but I'd have the text-based post so that I can go back and see kind of what I was doing that week just as an archive, like, for myself. And I think it would feel kind of inward facing in the same way that, you know, my enjoyment of this hobby has been thus far, primarily, like, again, engaging with like other people's discussions of this stuff, reading the forums, reading the image boards, um, and kind of sticking to myself. I don't know, like, this must be so weird for certain people to hear, because I feel like a lot of people in my audience, they already enjoy all of their hobbies in this way. Like, they just totally keep it to themselves. Um, but it's like I have certain things that I don't feel ashamed of. I don't feel insecure about or uncomfortable with. I simply am not vocal about them, you know? It's like I'll enjoy talking about it, but it's not like something that I am actively seeking out community for and trying to parade around. It's just sort of a fact of my life that I spend a lot of time on this stuff. And so, why would I make a big thing out of it? Um, and in a way, it seems like making a big thing out of it might kind of corrupt it in a way for me, and make my enjoyment of it into something different than what it's historically been. And I don't like the idea of that. Um, hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I think I think this is probably something a lot of other introverted people relate to.